Hello again, everyone. Mike Goucher from Marquette University Law School with you for our virtual On the Issue series here at the Lubar Center. Good to be with you today. This is our series of conversations with news and policymakers, people we like to say are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. And today we are talking about the November election, an election that at least has the potential to be unlike any other. We're talking about what will happen in the remaining weeks of the run-up to the election, and then what will happen on the election day itself. And joining us today are three key elections officials in the state of Wisconsin. The State Elections Commission Administrator, Meagan Wolfe, is with us today. Milwaukee Election Commission Executive Director, Claire Woodall-Vogg, is with us. And the Brookfield City Clerk, Kelly Michaels, joins us. So thanks to all three of you. And I'm wondering if you slept better on Monday night after we received word that the Supreme Court was not going to have the Green Party presidential candidate, Howie Hawkins, added to the ballot. There were concerns about what that could potentially mean in terms of reprinting ballots, confusion. Meagan Wolfe, I'll begin with you. Describe for me what the last few days were like for you and for your office.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. Well, I don't know what this sleep is that you speak of, but beyond that, I think that, certainly, we're relieved to be able to continue to move forward. I think as election administrators, we're always focused on the solutions and the next steps and looking forward. And holding patterns are difficult for us. And so I think for us to be able to have some resolution and move forward towards meeting those statutory deadlines is incredibly important. Our county clerks right now are working towards their statutory deadline, which is to distribute ballots by the 48th day before the election, so that's September 16th. And then our municipal clerks are, of course, preparing for their statutory deadline of sending out ballots by September 17th or the 47th day. And with the unprecedented volume of absentee ballot requests, that's a task that's going to take a lot longer for this election than it has in previous ones.
We'll talk about that unprecedented level of interest in mail-in balloting in a moment, but I do want to ask both Kelly Michaels and Claire Woodall-Vogg about their thoughts over the last few days. What would this have meant to you at a local level as a city clerk, as the election administrator in Milwaukee? What would this have meant to you had another name been added to the ballot? Claire Woodall-Vogg, I'll begin with you.
Yeah, so the city of Milwaukee has nearly 200 military and overseas voters who choose to receive their ballot via mail. So those voters were at the forefront of my thoughts and plans on how do we get them ballots as soon as possible if there was a change and we did have to reprint ballots. For the city of Milwaukee, we begin our prep work for printing our envelopes, getting our letters ready that go with the ballots about 10 days in advance. So we were in a holding pattern, but I just kept telling staff to keep going. But we are definitely relieved that starting tomorrow when we receive our absentee ballots, we can go ahead and start stuffing and start mailing and not have any more delays or confusions for Wisconsin voters. I think it's really important that we have consistency and timely information as much as possible. And I think that really would have caused confusion and chaos had there been a candidate added to the ballot at the last minute.
Kelly Michaels in Brookfield, was that your concern that there could be confusion if for some reason people had received one ballot, then they get a different ballot? There are cost issues. What were your specific concerns?
Well, I had a conversation with our county clerk Monday morning, and at that time, she was indicating that, if they were to have to add that name, that they would be reprinting the ballots. And I asked her what the lead time was and it was 2 weeks. And I thought, well, our deadline is the 17th, Thursday. And I thought, well, we're certainly not going to make our deadline if that occurs, because 2 weeks is a long time. And I too had concerns for voters in, out of the area. I mean, I think it would have been okay for our local voters, but, our military and our overseas, even our voters who, are vacationing in other areas, those are all out of the area. And I think those were the problematic where you really concerned about getting them the ballot on time and having them have enough time to return them. And so I think, for me, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, we could just get those ballots and meet our deadline and, have a really nice election for a change.
Yeah, it's there's always that uncertainty that is very, very much front and center. And now we still have a bit of uncertainty because we don't know exactly how many people are going to request mail-in ballots. We do know, Meagan, what? It's 1 million so far have asked for a mail-in ballot?
Over 1 million and growing every day. So I think we reached the 1 million mark over the weekend, and that number continues to grow each day. So, and then we see, that the clerks, in terms of the preparations to start meeting their deadline, at least half of those ballots, they've already started to do things like prepare the labels and get everything ready. And that's all tracked in our statewide system as well. So things are certainly moving along, and it's a volume that's much different than what we've seen in the past.
Are we ready to handle this kind of surge in mail-in balloting from your perspective?
So from my perspective, we have spent the last 4 years getting ready. Now things look a little different than we thought they would. And I think that the April election allowed us to really take a deep look at what this new voter behavior, this new volume of absentee ballots would require of us and require of our systems. And we really did a deep analysis of that. We put out a report on absentee voting specifically, as well as what we learned in the April election. And then recently, we just put out over a 130-page report about how the state of Wisconsin is ready for the November 3rd election. We've heard loud and clear from Wisconsin voters that they don't want us to just tell them we're ready. They want to see how. And so we went into great detail about 20 separate initiatives or things that we are doing in terms of program areas to make sure that the state of Wisconsin is ready to handle the November 3rd election.
At the local level, and I'll begin with Kelly Michaels in Brookfield on this, do you feel ready for this anticipated surge in mail-in balloting?
Well, I think that we're going to learn some more lessons, especially on the back end, because I think, our focus has been on the front end where we collectively as a state could do more. I think legislative-wise, we haven't been given the tools to help on the back end. So we're going to get all of these absentee ballots. However, we still only have 13 hours to process them. And I think that's where we're going to fall down a little bit, and we're going to learn some lessons because other states have more time to process all of those absentee ballots. I also think that, we're going to just learn those lessons and then also have more technology introduced because it's a very manual labor type process that takes so much time. And if you look at this process in other states, they have technology, they have machines that compare signatures. They're processing at such a larger speed and rate than we'll ever be able to do just because we need legislation to allow us more time. And we also need experience going forward to see what technology do we need to do a better job? And I think those are the lessons we're going to learn here.
Claire Woodall-Vogg, do you share that concern that you really, in a perfect world, need more time to be able to process these mail-in ballots?
I absolutely share that concern. As someone who has been in charge of our central count processing, which is where we process absentee ballots, even before our surge, when we saw more early in-person absentee voting, I've been there working the 20-hour days that it actually takes, or sometimes 24-hour days to process the volume of absentee ballots that we're seeing. We have very precise procedures, and I think that it's important that voters understand that, and we will be doing our best to kind of pull back the curtain so that voters see what it takes to process an absentee ballot. We are not anticipating that we will be done and have results right at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., but I'm hopeful that by the time the sun comes up on November 4th, that we will be finished and have election results. But it's definitely a concern. And the city of Milwaukee has been working with all of the tools that we have within our means to improve processes and procedures, like Kelly says. A lot of these processes and procedures are very manual. We've gone to purchasing an envelope printer so that we print our labels directly onto the envelopes instead of having an absentee label that has to be adhered by hand. Just simple tools and increase in technology, but really time is one thing that the legislature doesn't seem to ever want to give us, at least not this year. So it will definitely be a struggle, and we'll be doing our best to communicate to voters why there's a delay, and that a delay does not mean any cause for concern or invalidate the integrity of election results whatsoever on election night.
Kelly Michaels, did you also share that hope that by sunrise on the 4th that you'll have all of the votes in the city of Brookfield counted?
I do. I was fortunate enough. I was on a waiting list for a higher speed tabulator, and I was fortunate enough that the company, the vendor we use, they advanced the Wisconsin clerks to the top of the list because they recognized in their multi-state providing of equipment, they recognized that we were the state that had the least amount of time to process. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a quicker processor. So I feel like I feel better now than I did before I was still on the waiting list.
Kelly, let me go to Meagan here. Meagan, you know, we're in kind of a different world. I think people over time have grown used to having elections, winners and losers declared at some point in the late evening, even national elections oftentimes. Are we entering a different phase now where we're going to have to, because of the change in voter behavior, we're going to have to expect that counting the votes is simply going to take a little bit more time?
Well, Mike, one of the things that I think is really incredibly important to this conversation is we've never had the official results of an election on election night. The certification of an election can take up to a month because of the 3 levels of certification that have to happen before those results are final. So those election night results that you see are always unofficial. They're actually not even an aggregate that comes from the state level. Those are some of the unofficial results that are coming from each of the individual polling places. And then the media, the AP, does that aggregation to produce those unofficial result sets. Official results take time. They have to first be certified at the municipal level, where they have to reconcile any differences, make sure that every ballot was lawfully issued. Once they certify at the municipal level, it goes to the county where they do their review. If they find a problem, they'll send it back to the municipality. Then they certify at the county level. And then ultimately it comes to us at the state, where we again do reviews to make sure that all the numbers line up. And then we certify the results. That can happen up to a month after the election, and often does. And so really, in a lot of ways, nothing's different here in terms of how that process works. How those results become official. And we're going to continue to emphasize accuracy over speed because accuracy and transparency and security, those are all things that take time. And those are all things that are fundamental to elections and will remain a core value as part of this process.
You know what I'm saying, though? I mean, people have this sort of expectation that when they go to bed at night, they know who won and who lost. And I think what I'm suggesting here is that maybe people are going to have to be a little more patient to get the answer to that this time around.
Patient and willing to look for the actual source of that information. Like, you know, Claire and Kelly have been saying, transparency is so important as part of this. The tally of the votes, those are all publicly observable processes. And so people can watch that process, be involved in that process. And I think that's really important for people to know as well, that if you have questions about where the process is, to reach out, to seek those opportunities in your community, rather than assuming that there's something that has gone wrong in the process. All that information is available, and our clerks are incredibly transparent about the process and making sure people know where they are as the process unfolds.
I want to talk a little bit about what we learned from April, because the April election was unusual. We were at the sort of the front end of the pandemic. There were a lot of public health concerns at that time, still are to some extent, but I want to ask about what happened then and what we're doing differently this time around. So To take into account this surge in early voting, and maybe I'll begin with Claire on this. The city of Milwaukee, first of all, is going to have a lot more polling stations open this time around, but to take care of the early voting, you've got early drop-off points, you've got sports facilities being used as early voting locations. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing to try and make sure we get the early votes in as soon as possible.
Yeah, so the city of Milwaukee, while we're focused on absentee by mail voting because it is by far the safest option, we also want to make sure that we are expanding and increasing opportunities for voters to vote early at in-person absentee. So we have 15 open daily early voting sites. They include Fiserv Forum, which is a very large space downtown that will enable us to serve voters quickly in a large space so that they're not waiting in long lines. Social distancing outside on the sidewalk, for example, is not something that we want to see voters having to do like they did in April. And then we also have sites like Miller Park, which will be exclusively drive-through. We're also at neighborhood libraries, Midtown Shopping Center. So we've really worked to make sure that voters don't feel like absentee by mail is their only option if they want to vote before Election Day. But with that in mind, there's also been lots of concerns and national media about the Postal Service and if there are going to be delays in the Postal Service. So we also have 15 24-hour drop box locations where if voters receive their ballots by mail, they can return their ballot to any of the 15 drop box locations. Election Commission staff pick up those ballots daily with a very strict chain of custody, and then voters can check on My Vote in order to see and confirm that we did get their ballot back and it's been checked into the system. And those drop boxes will be open all the way through Election Day at 8 p.m. So if a voter, especially for some reason, they don't get their ballot until the last minute, they can always drop off at any of our early voting sites, but also utilize those drop boxes all the way up through Election Day. And then, like you mentioned, we also will be having far more than 5 polling places. And the biggest difference on that is time. We will have 172 as of right now polling locations out of our normal 180 on November 3rd.
Kelly Michaels, is the city of Brookfield doing anything that will help with the processing of early votes, drop-off points, things like that? Do you need that in Brookfield?
Well, we're certainly a micro fraction of the size of Milwaukee. I think our city is like 7 miles tip to tip, and City Hall is in the middle. But we do have a secure drop box that is, secured by camera, and we also are offering early voting and curbside, and we have 7 polling locations that will be open. So what Claire described is very similar to what we have on a smaller scale. And I think that's the point really, I think, for municipal clerks is you really have to put your resources into where, what's reasonable for your community. And when we discussed that with our mayor and our emergency director, we really thought our buck should go in the processing of absentee mail ballots. It was like $61,000, so not cheap. And so we really we have a single location for early voting like we've always had, and we have a single drop box, but we do have a high-speed processor. So hopefully we've made a smart choice in where we're putting our resources.
Meagan, a couple of questions for you. One is related to what point Claire raised, and that is with the Postal Service. And we had these reports from April of tubs of votes in the Appleton, Oshkosh area that had not been counted, about 1,600. There were some incidents in Fox Point of ballots not being delivered. There seemed to be some confusion in there. I know your office has been talking with people in the Postal Service. How confident do you feel that those problems will not occur again?
Well, we've done some things in terms of what we can control on our side for elections. And so we have weekly meetings with the Postal Service. We've been really thankful for their engagement on this issue. We've involved local election officials as well in some of those meetings, as well as putting out some information to our local election officials about how to work with their local postal branches. Just like elections, the Postal Service is also decentralized. There's rural postal branches in most of our communities that may have different rules or different ways that they engage with sort of the overarching system. And so I think that's really important as well, to have sort of that state level engagement as well as local engagements as well, to make sure we all understand how the process works. We've also done some additional things in our statewide voter registration database to incorporate intelligent mail barcodes. And what this does is it allows, first of all, voters to have more transparency into the process, for them to be able to track their ballots to make sure that they're going to arrive on time. It also provides for some additional accountability to make sure that we know where those ballots are. And if something is stuck at a milestone for too long, it gives the clerks, it gives the voters tools and solutions to be able to remedy that while there's still time. We'll be able to produce reports to see if ballots have not reached the milestones when we expect them to. And based on some of those reports, we'll be able to work with the clerks, work with the voters to, again, make sure that we're able to fix those situations while there's still time. And so I think that those are incredible improvements that will really help us to catch problems like we may have seen in April, but also those local engagements I think are equally important so that we have all of those pieces working together and we're able to communicate and figure out what happens in the event something does go wrong.
And I know you have said this, and I'm sure your peers here would say this too, that really one of the big keys here is to vote. If you want to vote by mail, do it soon. Sooner better than later. Get to it as soon as you possibly can. Is that the message you want to get out here?
Absolutely. If you decide that voting by mail absentee is the right option for you, every voter in the state of Wisconsin has 3 statutory available options at the polls on election day, in-person absentee, or by mail absentee. And if you decide that by mail absentee is the right option for you, getting that request in as soon as possible, so the clerks have time to process those. There's a lot of security and safeguards that happen on the front end when a request is submitted that take time, as well as getting that ballot to the voter and then the voter getting their ballot back. All of those things, the more time you can have on your side, the more successful you'll be through that process.
I'll let Kelly and Claire weigh in on that too. Claire, the sooner the better, I'm sure, from your perspective.
Absolutely. And I was actually pleasantly surprised over the weekend. I actually have it sitting here on my desk to receive a postcard from the Postal Service that said, if you plan to vote by mail, plan ahead, and had a checklist. And I was glad to see that it reiterated the same dates and deadlines that I've seen Meagan talk about, which is that the statutory deadlines by state law, you have until the Thursday before the election to request an absentee ballot by mail. But with other state laws, it's not a realistic deadline. So that voters who want to vote by mail shouldn't be looking to what state statutes say. Should be planning ahead. If you want to do the entire process, give yourself at least 2 weeks. But if you know who you want to vote for, there's no reason not to go ahead and request your absentee ballot today. The sooner that we get your ballot back in our office, the sooner we can check it in, get it organized, and get it prepped for election day, which speaks to Kelly's issue, which means we can process ballots faster on election day. But we've had really encouraging improvements with our relationship with the post office at a local level. Even in August, they actually delivered around 7 o'clock at night a final delivery of absentee ballots that were being delivered at district branches. And they're going to do that again in November. So I know that the Postmaster General of Milwaukee is very committed to making sure that absentee ballots get where they need to go.
Kelly, I'll give you a moment to address this too, from a clerk's perspective, the importance of early voting.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what's been said, but I would also encourage voters to provide their contact information so that the clerks, really, they're helping us to help them, because if they make a mistake that would jeopardize the acceptance of their ballot, we make reasonable attempts to contact them. And so it's always quicker if we have contact information, an email or a phone number. Otherwise, we have no choice but to mail a letter. Well, if you're sending your ballot in, late in the game and you haven't given me contact information, I'm going to mail you a letter that you're not going to receive that's going to notify you that, there's something wrong with the certification on your ballot. And so I would encourage people as well for that reason to, return it early and provide contact information so that we can help you.
Meagan, one of your concerns I've seen you address is bad information out there. Help us understand what you mean by bad information, because voters do get an awful lot of mailings, and some of them are from groups, frankly, that have their own interests in mind. They're not just representing the state of Wisconsin. What specifically is your concern about the information that voters may get between now and Election Day?
No, you're right. There are so many groups out there that are sending information to voters, and some of them have the best of intentions and some of them may not. And so I think for voters, it can be really difficult to sort through the fog of all of this information to find out what is the truth, where is the legitimate source of information. And so we've been doing a lot of work at the state level as well as with our local election partners to establish ourselves as election officials as the official source of information in terms of answering some of those questions for voters. And so oftentimes voters will say, I received a text message, it didn't quite feel right, or I received this mailer and it didn't feel right. What do I do? Is the information they provided legitimate? And we tell voters to, frankly, to ignore those messages and to reach out to your election official because they will be able to provide official information. And so, that can sometimes be a difficult message to spread, but I think that it's important because your election official is going to be able to tell you how elections actually work. We've also done some work this year to find out where voters go for information, what type of information they're looking for. And we found from Wisconsin voters, they're really interested in the mechanics of the election process. They want to know how it works. They want to know how they fit in. And we've also found that they really trust their local election officials. And so we've produced a lot of tools and information for our local election partners to help inform people on social media, give them tools to reach out to the media to try to pitch stories about the mechanics of elections. And so we're going to continue that important work with our 1,850 election partners around the state to make sure that voters have that source of legitimate information and know who to reach out to if they have questions or if they're seeing conflicting messages.
We've been spending a fair amount of time talking about early voting. Let's talk about day of voting, because there are still many people who like to go to the polls on Election Day. That is part of the election experience for them. Kelly Michaels and Claire Woodall-Vogg, I'll begin with you on this. Do you have enough poll workers? Will you have enough poll workers on Election Day to handle the crowds of people who want to vote in person?
The only good thing to come out of April 7th election was that it gave a visual of what it looks like when the city of Milwaukee didn't have enough poll workers. So very organically, we have not had to do too much heavy recruitment, oddly enough, and we continue to see hundreds of people apply each week. Just since August 11th election, we had over 1,100 applicants apply to be poll workers. So City of Milwaukee is very confident. We've got virtual training set up, and we had plenty of poll workers to operate our 170 polling places in August. But I'm really confident that we will have enough election inspectors to work in November. And we are planning ahead. We're planning for that no-show rate for when people get sick or might have been exposed to COVID-19, really working into our staffing numbers, those expected absences. So we have every intent of operating at a neighborhood level on Election Day. And so far, our poll worker recruitment and the response from community members stepping up to be poll workers has been absolutely phenomenal since April.
Kelly Michaels, what's it been like in Brookfield, or are you having to recruit people?
Well, we're in a recruitment right now, and fortunately there's been some newspaper articles that have really driven the conversation. And I'm happy to report that I have currently 30 applicants to, and they're still coming in. So I think I'll be okay for November, just like Claire says, and I've been pleased to see the public support, and there are people that are reaching out saying, you know, I'm young, I've taken a day off work, I'm healthy, you know, I can do this for you. And I, you know, it really has been the good thing that came out of April when, you know, we didn't have enough poll workers to run our 7 sites. We had one combined site. And I think the public really like got the message, like, we need help. And they've really stepped up. So I'm pleased. I think we're in good shape.
Meagan Wolfe, I know you're big on planning for contingencies. A lot of different scenarios are planned out. And so let me toss one out to you, and that is that we are still in a pandemic, and there is still talk about a second wave of this virus in a bigger, more robust way than it is even today. Do you have to have conversations with Governor Evers about the National Guard being on standby? Do those kinds of things have to take place just in case?
Those conversations are always taking place. So, you know, we've laid some great groundwork with our local election officials over the past 4 years in terms of contingency planning. We've been doing scenario-based trainings in person for years. We were one of the first states to sort of adopt a statewide program for that. So our clerks have gone through multiple versions of these planning exercises, not just about cybersecurity, but about situations that might happen where you have to move a polling place, and how do you do that and still maintain the integrity of the process. And so I think from that perspective, we've laid some really great groundwork. But in terms of the things that we saw in April and building off of some of those contingencies we had to put in place, we continue to have those conversations in the event that something like that is needed. We continue to have those conversations for the 7th Congressional District race in May, for the August statewide election, where we had to utilize the National Guard again in those elections. And we've been able to lay some really great groundwork with our partners at the State Emergency Operations Center. And so we'll keep working with them to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I think regardless of what's thrown our way, we have some resilient processes in place to help us make sure that we're able to adjust course if we need to, depending on developing circumstances.
So the three of you maybe can address this. So you feel confident if somebody wants to come to the polls on election day and vote the way they've always voted, they will be safe. We have learned enough from April to guarantee public safety to the best of our ability. Would that be accurate? Kelly, I'll begin with you and maybe have Claire weigh in on this too.
Yeah, that was one of our goals for our August setup, was to take a look at what that looks like with a large turnout. And our setup crew, you know, had instructions to pace it, mark it 6 feet. And we got feedback from that 2 of our sites were not going to cut it. And so we were able to, in our partnership with the Elmbrook schools, we were able to get the high schools, which they set their calendar so it's a non-student day. So we were able to have all 7 of our sites are in school gyms, which I think that is going to really work well as far as protecting our voters with safe distancing and you know, the requirements that we have. We have poll workers that have masks. We have, you know, the hand sanitizers now. We have face shields. So I think for November, we are much better poised than we were in April. And those were hard lessons, but, you know, we got through and we learned.
Claire, how do you feel about it as we near the November election?
You know, as cliched as it is, I liken going to your polling place to going to your grocery store. If you're comfortable going to the grocery store, it will be very similar. If you go at a peak time, you might have a little bit of a line, but there are all of the same safety precautions in place that you're seeing at your neighborhood grocery store. There's plexiglass between election workers and voters. We're practicing social distancing. We're disinfecting surfaces. So while early voting might be the best and safest option, voting by mail, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think it's important that voters know that election day polling place voting is open, it's safe, and it's oftentimes the most convenient option since it's at a neighborhood-based level.
We're having a very sort of a pleasant, nonpartisan discussion, but as we all know, this is a very heated election cycle, I guess is one way to put it. People have strong feelings, strong emotions. People also have their own concerns about the integrity of the vote. And so you have people who want to be elections observers. Are you having any particular concerns given the very sort of divisive rhetoric we see in America today, where people just strongly disagree about things? Are there concerns about this November and the participation of elections observers in this process? Meagan, I'll begin with you.
So, I do think we have to be prepared for that possibility. The chief inspector of each polling place is the one that is ultimately in charge of the polling place, and observers cannot cause a disturbance at the polling place or a disruption to the process. And so I think, that's also really important. But I do think we also need to think about things like de-escalation training. For voters, for observers, and just for some of the situations that might arise. And so that's a thing that we're also continuing to look into and incorporate in some of our training for our local election officials. I think developing good relationships on an ongoing basis with maybe your community organizations or groups that might be involved with observing elections is also important at the state and the local level, so that we all know what the rules are and can make sure that we're held accountable to those same standards. But I do think, giving our clerks and our poll workers some tools that they can use to de-escalate situations is also going to be an important part of our training in the next few weeks.
Claire Woodall-Vogg, I see you nodding in agreement on that. Do you have the training? Do you feel that the people working the polls on those days are prepared for these potential situations to arise?
I do, and we always train our chief inspectors before general elections on being prepared to have more observers in the polling place. There's more interest, but I was nodding my head because I think the key to good observer relations is communication, and it's making sure that the processes are open and transparent. That's what observers are there to observe, and making the time to answer questions if time allows, and really let them witness the process. So hopefully they will then share that information. It's far better social media posts than falsely spreading information. So I kind of view our observers as ambassadors to voters to show them the process, or to share with their circle what the process is, and hope that every observer leaves going, oh, well, that was a really well-run polling place. Or, oh, that's how they process absentee ballots in Milwaukee. It really is open and transparent, and open to everyone to come and observe. So I really stress to our election workers that observers are an important part of the election process. They're there as a check and balance, and we should treat them with the respect, and really be proactive in our communication with them.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, is that sort of the philosophy in Brookfield too?
It is. We definitely, want to encourage observers. We have a good relationship. We rarely have problems with observers. I think they're all well trained by their organizations. Every now and then you could have, someone, that's maybe not behaving appropriately. We have an ask, warn, process that we train. So our chief inspectors, they're very good at, asking them and just clarifying, what type of behavior is expected. And then, if it is something that escalates, they warn that they've been asked, and that they're now being warned that should it continue, that they will call the police. And the police have a policy to arrest. So the police, if the police are called, they will arrest them for, whatever disorderly conduct. Or so I think our chief inspectors are very good about saying, hey, I don't want to do that. We appreciate, but we just need you to do this for, XYZ reason. And, it's a rare occurrence, I think, that you would have to escalate it all the way to the top. But they do get the training so that they do know, what the expectations are, and, how to handle someone who is passionate about their politics.
So another final point here would be the integrity of the vote and election security. And so we know, based on past experience, that we have foreign actors who would like nothing better than to meddle in America's elections. We have hackers who just for the heck of it or for the thrill of it might want to mess with our elections. Are we prepared for the world of technology challenges that are out there today? Meagan, I'll begin with you. Do we have the resources to make sure that our elections and the vote is exactly what we all want it to be?
You know, election security has been at the forefront of our planning for the last 4 years. And so I really see it as having sort of 3 legs to it. The statewide voter registration database, where all the voter records are housed, voting equipment, and then training for our local election officials. And all of those things, the state of Wisconsin has been at the forefront of securing elections. And so we've done everything from incorporating multi-factor authentication into our system, endpoint detection on each of the devices that our local election officials use to access the system. All things that make sure only the people with the correct permissions are able to access voter records is an incredibly strong system. We've also done things like grants to the local election officials and to the counties. For the local election officials over the last year, we've made sure that every single one has a secure computer, has access to training, and also has IT support. If you even look back a few years ago, there were close to 1,000 jurisdictions that weren't able to say that they had some of those basic things. And they now have all of those security measures to make sure that we're operating on a level playing field. Then when it comes to things like voting equipment, I think the decentralized nature of our states is also an incredible benefit here because each, again, of those local election officials is the ones managing that equipment, and it's all different in terms of how it's operated. But one thing that is the same is the requirement for pre-election testing of the voting equipment in every single community. That's a publicly noticed process where you can go watch your voting equipment be tested, make sure that it's operating in the way that it's supposed to be. And then we have post-election random voting equipment audits as well. And our commission has actually increased that from the statutory minimum to more than 5% of the voting equipment machines are audited after election day, where a hand count is basically conducted to make sure that it matches the tally of the voting equipment. And we don't select those municipalities until, of course, after the election, so that we're not giving someone a roadmap to where those audits are going to happen. But you see that those are incredibly accurate at the end of the day, and those procedures and audits are in place to prove that. Again, those are all publicly observable things that people can go watch in their communities on both the front end before election day and then on the back end to make sure that things worked out the way they should.
So you're very confident in the integrity of the vote?
I think we've laid some incredible groundwork. It's been a steep hill to climb, but it's something where I also feel really confident because we have the most decentralized system, which means we have 1,850 city, town, and village clerks. And so in addition to all of those huge security, cybersecurity measures that we've put into place, we also have that sort of local connection and people that are able to monitor the election system, understand their voters and what's usual, and can also detect anomalies there. So I think we're just incredibly well positioned, but we never are going to get comfortable with where we're at because election security changes every day, and we're going to remain vigilant. We're going to remain sharp in making sure that we're keeping pace with that changing threat landscape.
Kelly Michaels, do you share Meagan Wolfe's confidence in the fact that the vote will be counted accurately and in a secure way?
I do, and I think she hit the nail on the head with the decentralized system, because if you compare Wisconsin to other states that have a top-down method and they're all, using the same equipment, it's been programmed, at the top, and, it's much easier to infiltrate something like that than a bottoms up where you have, 1,850 plus clerks who are, we're not using the same equipment, our communities are different, we're not doing things at the same time. Things are different if you look at, we're following the law, but how we get there is different. So to infiltrate that number of systems is significantly more difficult than it would be from a top down. And so I have a lot of confidence with local municipal clerks closest to the voters administering elections. I just love how Wisconsin does it.
Claire Woodall-Vogg, do you share the opinion that our differences are what make us strong in protecting our elections?
I think our differences are what make us strong as far as election security goes. It is the silver lining of having 1,850 different ways to do things. And I think that the 2016 recount actually solidified any questions as far as our machines accurately reading our ballots. It was a very successful recount, at least here in the city of Milwaukee, and saw very few changes. And so, yes, I feel very confident about the integrity of our election results and the safety and security of our equipment. Again, it is a precise process of processing absentee ballots. It's not quite as simple as at the polls where you just feed your ballot through. And that process will just take time, and just emphasizing to voters that time is not suspicious, that, that not having those unofficial election results on election night is not an indication of anything going wrong with our equipment or our counting.
Yeah, I was going to say that might be a good place to wrap up this conversation. How do you deal with that sentiment on the part of some in the public? Maybe it's a growing sentiment on the part of some that we're not so sure about our election results. We're not that confident that what our elections officials tell us actually occurred did actually occur. Does that trouble the three of you who do this professionally? This is what you do, and yet there is that sentiment out there that I think we all would acknowledge exists. Claire, I'll begin with you.
I mean, that sentiment actually exists within my own extended family, so it's very close to home. And it's very frustrating. I would encourage anyone who has any question about the process to either sign up to be an election worker or go and observe on election day. And I think you will see a very different story than what is being tweeted or posted on social media. So it's an exhausting, tireless job being an election administrator, especially in 2020, but we do it because we all believe in democracy and every vote counting equally. It just blows my mind the amount of conspiracy theories out there that it's very discouraging. But I hope that as election officials, we can do a good job communicating, pulling back that curtain over the next 6 to 8 weeks to really show voters the process, because like Meagan said, that's what they want to know. And I think it's important that it come from us and that we show them what the process looks like, so that they have faith that no matter which way they cast their ballot, it's been counted and it's been counted accurately.
Kelly, is transparency the answer for countering this sentiment that does exist?
I believe it is, and also to inform people that election laws are different in different states. And so processes in different states or problems in different states may not be what we experience in Wisconsin, just because we do things decentralized. And so I always encourage people who are unsure to get involved. Become a poll worker or an observer, or call your local municipal clerk. We love to talk to people about, what really is going on versus, having Facebook or Twitter or these other forums, light up with misinformation. My deputy clerk was just showing me her neighborhood place on her Facebook was just, full of misinformation, and, lots of people were engaging. And, we said, why wouldn't they just call the source, go to the source and find out, what is the truth about XYZ topic versus just, feeding off of misinformation.
And Meagan, I'll give you the final word on this. Can we change that sentiment that exists, at least on the part of some in the public?
So, as Kelly and Claire said, transparency is the foundation of elections. Every single step of the process is publicly observable. Elections don't happen in the dark. Elections don't happen behind closed doors. Every step of the way, the public can get involved and actually see how the process works. All the way from the state level, where we have a commission that has to make decisions in public meetings. We've had almost 30 of them so far this year, and you can watch that decision-making process. At the local level, again, those voting equipment tests, the tally of the vote, the canvas where they certify the results, every single step of the process, including the absentee in-person process, is publicly observable. And so I think the transparency piece is there. There's a wide open window into the elections process that's never closed. I think that voters have a responsibility to actually find out the facts. To not fall victim or believe information that's not coming from legitimate sources. I think voters really do have a responsibility to seek out the truth and to go and observe these things and find out how they actually work before they perpetuate misinformation. And so I think as much as transparency is of course foundational to elections, there's a responsibility on the behalf of all Wisconsinites to engage with that process and to make sure that they actually understand and are seeking out those opportunities to find the truth.
I want to thank the three of you for this conversation, which I think is a good, healthy conversation and informative for people out there who want to have a better understanding of how elections will be administered in the state of Wisconsin in November. So I want to thank Meagan Wolfe, the Wisconsin Elections Commission Administrator. I want to thank Claire Woodall-Vogg, who is I will say the newish Milwaukee Election Commission Executive Director, and Kelly Michaels, who is the Brookfield City Clerk. Thanks to the three of you for being with us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in today for this virtual On the Issues presentation. We'll be back with much more throughout the fall semester. I'm Mike Goucher. We'll see you next time.